Hello, hello. It's good to see you again, and welcome back to another installment of Optimizing Your Financial World. I'm your host and moderator, Ryan Ruff. As you know, our star of the show, Mr. Mark Wade, president of Echelon Family Office. He'll be joining me momentarily. But look, first and foremost, we want to say congratulations on finding your way back here to the show. We've got a lot of great wealth management related discussions on this show every episode. And today we've got a really good one. I'm excited to jump into it. Today, we are really addressing is the 5 big mistakes that affluent homeowners are making today. So, of course, many of us out there are homeowners. We own not only just our home, but other significant assets that have wealth attached to them. Well, today we're addressing some of those key core mistakes that are being made when it comes to these assets and how you can kind of mitigate them, and how Mark goes through these conversations with his clients to mitigate these mistakes. So that being said, let's go ahead and bring Mark Wade out to get the conversation rolling. Mark, how you doing today? Good to see you.
Doing great, Ryan. Excited for our topic today. It's such a common one, and so many people overlook it.
Yeah, no, great point. And I'm sure you're going to share a little bit, of that as we go through our conversation today, because yes, many of the things do get overlooked when it comes to your assets. You think you're covered, but maybe you're not. So let's go ahead and get into it, Mark. Let's start today by just acknowledging that affluent families and individuals, they often have just a lot on their plate, right? They make and in having so much on your plate, it can be easy to overlook some issues that might be tied to some of those significant assets like your home. So let's just start today by talking about why it makes sense, Mark, for homeowners to do kind of a financial checkup of sorts on their home, or maybe even homes if they have multiple. For example, let's start here, maybe examining their insurance coverage to, in order to address any, issues maybe before they come problems. Talk to me about this importance of doing a financial checkup on your home.
Oh, you're right. This issue it's a tinderbox because over 40 years we've examined hundreds, if not 1,000, different homeowner policies, and it's so common and so simple to see how important issues can get overlooked. And many problems result from a simple improper assessment of how much insurance is needed. And that can be sometimes the homeowner's fault, or it could be the fault of the property or casualty agent. But in either case, you can see almost immediately why examining, the overall insurance coverage is so important. A lot of families are underinsured, which can result in significant losses incurred by that family under poor circumstances. So nowadays, with the proper with property values rising so much as they have, these losses can be astronomical and devastating to a family's overall wealth, and there go the financial security for generations to come. Okay, and that's not to mention the overall risk you face by being underinsured across the board. So it's not just a home, but all other areas of property and casualty risks.
Sure, sure. I mean, at the end of the day, it's something that can happen overnight. Your life can change, and you certainly want to make sure you're covered. So, Mark, let's unpack these 5 critical mistakes that we're talking about today on the show. What would you say are the 5 most prevalent, significant mistakes that affluent families are making when it comes to their home's financial health?
Well, it was difficult now because now you're only limiting me to 5. Okay, so let's see. Okay, well, the first and obvious one, let's say, is not having enough liability insurance, and then probably failing to ensure that all the different types of coverage works together, and especially on multiple homes. Unless if you have more, your residence and a vacation home, or even multiple vacation homes, coordinating all those things is critical. Failing to list trusts and business entity, liability companies, on their homeowner policies, and they are failing to adequately address or even address at all, unique home features or building materials. I see that all the time. And then failing to provide proper coverage, and this is a one that people just ignore, sometimes intentionally, failing to provide the proper coverage on high value assets.
I love that. So Mark, let's start one by one and start tackling that list. I think the very first one you mentioned was not having enough liability insurance. Talk to me about this, and what do you find to be the most, really the biggest issues when it comes to not having enough liability insurance?
Sure. When we look at liability insurance mistakes, oftentimes they look like not having an umbrella policy at all, not having a large enough umbrella policy, And so, for example, regarding these umbrella policies, an affluent family might have a net worth of, let's say, $10 million. Okay. But they're only carrying a $1 million umbrella liability policy. So, because of different asset positioning techniques that they may have put in place and maybe have done some planning, let's give them the benefit of the doubt. And let's say that the assets that would be attachable in a lawsuit are only, let's say, $6.5 million. Well, out of the 10 million, if 6.5 million is exposed to a lawsuit and they've only got a $1 million liability policy, where does that leave? $5.5 million of their net worth is unprotected. So, the bottom line is most families have umbrella policies, but many don't have a large enough umbrella policy. These umbrella policies, let's just cut right to the chase. These umbrella policies are often the most cost-effective and least expensive form of asset protection you can have. But asset protection doesn't end there. There are other things that you need to put in place and care about.
So, Mark, for anybody in our audience right now that might be asking themselves, how the heck do I tell if I have a lack of adequate coverage? What might be some signs for them that they should be on the lookout for?
It's simple, but unfortunately, the simple escapes us a lot of times, right? So, one thing to think about is the amount of assets that are going to be attachable in a lawsuit, and then set your umbrella limits to cover the amount that would be attachable, the amount at risk. Or if you've only done minimal asset protection planning, you might basically consider, have enough umbrella insurance to cover your whole net worth. So it's just depends on how much work you have done already to mitigate the risks, and then make sure you have enough umbrella coverage to cover the amount that is still at risk. And Ryan, another tip is to be sure that you name all the items that should be covered in that policy. Make sure they're all named in that policy.
Mark, that's good stuff for our audience right there. And I do want to shift gears because you mentioned something interesting earlier, is this idea of maybe somebody owning multiple homes and the challenges that pop up on this end. What do you see are some of the big insurance related pitfalls to avoid for somebody that might have multiple homes?
A competent PNC agent, they're going to say, if you have homes in different states, there can be complications if the homes are insured under different policies issued by different companies. Ideally, for coverage to be cohesive and work in unison with your entire plan, and to make sure that you have the best cost structure for those policies, all the policies should be written with one high net worth insurance company. Another thing that I see, a family could fail to list one of their homes on the umbrella policy. So even with a $15 million umbrella policy, if one of your homes is not specifically listed, then the policy doesn't cover that home, and you can be at risk to lose the entire value of that home or the home itself.
Mark, another one of those five critical mistakes you mentioned, which stuck out in my mind because I would have overlooked it, is this mistake of failing to list, a trust or an LLC, a business really, on your homeowner's insurance policy. Why is this a potentially risky mistake? And I would imagine this is one that is kind of often overlooked sometimes. But talk to me about this one.
Often overlooked is an understatement, Ryan. You know, I-
Sure.
I can't tell you how often I see this. Clients will come to us, and let's face it, most clients, when they come to us, they have some or maybe even all of the work done, but it's a huge difference between having work done and having it done as well and coordinated as well as possible with your overall plan. So lots of times we see affluent families put their home or homes in a trust or an LLC for estate planning reasons. When they come to us for a second opinion or that great stress test that we always talk about, and all too often the mistake we see is that they fail to list the LLC or the trust as an additional insured on the homeowners or the umbrella policy. Failing to do this could be a very costly mistake. And in fact, if someone were to sue you for, say, getting injured while working on your home, that coverage wouldn't work. It would not be an effective coverage on that home, even though you have a trust or an LLC and you have a liability or an umbrella policy. If you have not structured everything properly and listed everything properly, they're worthless.
Man, it all comes back to working with the right professionals to make sure that your plan is your plan. It's custom tailored to make sure that all those I's are dotted and T's are crossed. And this is a big one right here, Mark. So another, mistake that you had mentioned earlier, though, was this idea of affluent homeowners might needing to address kind of their home's unique architecture or construction materials. Talk to us about this one, because this is an interesting one that pops out to me.
Yeah. You know, the real estate market's great right now. Everybody says it's a seller's market, right? And so when we look at all the beautiful homes that our clients own, oftentimes they have very distinctive architecture about the house, okay? Or, and this is very common, they have used specific materials to build a home, which among high-end homes, these materials, they can either be unique, they can be especially expensive, and in some cases, they could be rare. So the replacement cost for some of these unique, expensive, or rare features, could be huge if the home isn't properly insured. In fact, may not be covered at all.
Right. So, a home made out of marble, not that the entire home is going to be made out of marble, but sure, if there are, elements of really rare materials, I mean, that's something that somebody needs to make sure that that's listed on that in policy. So another, I would imagine, part of this that really gets overlooked, one of these critical mistakes that is. So Mark, finally, that fifth critical mistake that you had mentioned was really surrounding the idea of the stuff. Everybody's got it. We've, your collections, your valuables, your jewelry, you name it. Talk to me about this and why this also sometimes gets overlooked, even though you would think it makes sense. Ensure the high value items that are in your life, but talk to me about the stuff and how this enters the picture.
Sure, stuff. Everybody's got stuff, right? And some people have, and the value is intrinsic to everybody. You can have value that's so important to you because they're family mementos. And oftentimes our clients have things that are of very high value monetary wise. So, these types of special high value assets, they need their own policies. And this is going to ensure that they're listed at the proper value and that they're not subject to deductibles.
No, a really good point there, Mark, especially, car collections, jewelry collections, you name it. I mean, obviously they have that monetary value, but that's also a good point that you made with that intrinsic value, those family heirlooms. So when it comes to the stuff, got to make sure that, it's insured in some capacity. So Mark, we just rattled off five critical, mistakes that homeowners are making when it comes to whether it be their home, their stuff, the LLCs being listed, a lot of different, really important items for people to consider. If somebody's out there watching, listening to our conversation today, and they're thinking about the fact that they might be committing one of these mistakes, what should be the next steps then that they should take or consider taking really to address these issues?
Hey, Ryan,
Yeah.
before we get to that, can I give you an example because something just rung in my mind. Uh, we have this California couple, right? And they got to have great love for art, and they've collected a lot of pieces over, I don't know, a 30-year period, let's say. Uh, but they knew that they had a lot of pieces that had appreciated in value, but they'd never gone through the trouble to get current appraisals, so they really didn't know what the total value of their collection was. And but they just assumed, that they were properly insured. And when they came to us, they said that, well, look, if something happens, we'll just make a claim on our policy. Well, we advised them against that, of course. They did not act quickly enough, unfortunately, and what happened. One piece of their art sustained some damage, and that's when they found out how much it had increased in value. Because when they made the claim, the insurance company got the current market value on what that piece of artwork was, and they did not cover the entire value. So that's when they found out that the personal property coverage on their homeowner's policy wasn't enough to cover all that damage. So they contacted a new agent, and who was referred to them. And that agent individually went ahead and insured each piece of art, which should have been done from the beginning. So, scheduling art, scheduled art is what we call it, means that each piece is covered under its own policy, which has a current market value. And if something should happen to that piece, it's going to be fully covered with no deductible for the full value, even though that appraisal might be a year old and the value might have risen dramatically. It's still going to be covered at its full cost because it's a scheduled piece of art on their policy. So that means, that in the future that if unfortunate circumstances should befall them again, they're going to get paid the entire value of that piece. And this same standard, this same principle applies to collections of all types, jewelry and automobiles and firearms and so on and so forth. So these types of assets need their own individual policies, that will ensure the proper values and will make sure that they're not subject to deductibles in the future.
Mark, that's a great example. I appreciate you sharing that because, yeah, had they taken the proper steps on the front end, this never would have even been a conversation in the first place once that painting, had sustained some damage. So really, really great example. And thank you for sharing that with us. But Mark, we've thrown a lot at our audience today in terms of these 5 critical mistakes. If they're sitting there thinking, wow, I actually might be guilty of making 1 or 2 of these mistakes here, what would you say should be the next steps then for them to, to take or consider taking to mitigate maybe the mistake or 2 that they're making?
Sure. Let me let me use an analogy, right? If your roof's leaking, you need to fix your roof, right? If the rain's running down the side of your houses and your gutter's leaking, you need to address the problem you have with your gutters. Well, you might also need to evaluate and repair your home insurance policies and your other type of liability policies. So check with a trusted advisor or a qualified P&C agent, or you could contact us for that complimentary stress test that we always talk about, and we'll include the review of your P&C policies, which includes your homeowners policies, as part of that stress test.
Mark, that's a really interesting point. I was just going to ask you, what could an advisor really do to help homeowners? So talk with me about that stress test process that you would go through with somebody. How would you, a financial advisor, a wealth manager, be able to help them with this kind of process?
Wow. How often does this topic come up in our conversations, Ryan?
Too often.
Stress. Well, but it's so important, right?
Right.
The stress test that we just mentioned, it can really identify gaps in your coverage, and that's going to allow you to take steps, to protect yourself to the full extent, required. Stress tests are conducted by some of the world's wealthiest families. We didn't pluck that name out of thin air. Stress tests, they aren't the exclusive tool of the 1%, but you can have your current property and casualty coverage evaluated by an expert who'll take into account your needs and your preferences and your concerns. So the stress testing process, is one that you can oversee yourself, or you can have one of your trusted advisors manage the process. Either way, you can potentially gain more clarity about your insurance situation and avoid those 5 big mistakes that we just talked about.
Yeah, stress test seems like a great jumping off point to get that process rolling. Make sure that any of those risks are mitigated before they truly become the mistakes that we talked about. But Mark, really appreciate you carving out some of your time to be with us today. And if anybody is interested in maybe reaching out for that free stress test or just to have a deeper conversation regarding these 5 critical mistakes, how would they go about reaching out to you and your team?
Sure. They can always see us on the web at www.echelonoffice.com. That's ECHELON office.com. They can contact me directly at mwade, that's MWADE, at echelonoffice.com, or they can call into our office at 888-892-9882.
Fantastic. Well, Mark, hey, look, again, appreciate you and your time. Looking forward to our next conversation because I know it's bound to be a good one.
As always, Ryan, thanks a lot for a great conversation today. I look forward to the next one.
Hey, all right. Well, hey, look, we want to thank you, of course, our audience, for jumping along and being on board with the conversation today. If you liked the conversation, you enjoyed what you heard today, please feel free to like it, comment, subscribe to our show on whichever platform you're checking us out on. And then, of course, share this information with family, friend, business owners that you know, because these conversations, you heard me say it once, I'll say it 1,000 times, they're meant for you. They're meant to optimize your financial world by implementing some of these strategies and these thought processes that Mark and his team at Echelon Family Office are incorporating on a daily basis. So for Mr. Mark Wade, I'm Ryan Ruff. We're saying so long today, and we thank you so much once more for joining us on today's edition of Optimizing Your Financial World.